Lease options on a July Friday. I know I've talked about this. It's a really good thing to know how to do. It's not every deal every time, obviously, but it's just one of those special things that if you know how to do it for one of your properties, or you can bring it as a broker, this can be a very effective thing. So what I want to do today is talk about this verbally, and then I just quickly scribbled. I made up a little bit of a problem. I have to make one change to it, but I can make that as we go through. And then in the end, I'm going to show you how to do a simple T account with internal rate of return so that you know beforehand whether you should do this. And this is really one of the cool things about using the Does It Pencil tools, is that when you know them and when you're comfortable with them, they absolutely allow you to plug in numbers and make decisions before pen ever hits paper in real estate. And I don't know anybody else who knows how to do, I mean, some people, but I think this is really super important, and for brokers in the room, very value add skill. Okay, so that's what I want to talk about today. All right, so before we start, has anybody done a lease option? You want to say anything about it? Any specific questions? To start off with a little audience participation.
I know that there's or they were a big buyer. I think it was Invitation Homes or some arm that, they would buy homes and do a lease option to the first renter.
Okay. Do you know why they would do that?
Because no one ever exercised it, the price would go up just 5% a year. They had 5 years to exercise the option. And, they bought those properties with the purpose of keeping them as rentals. But, if you could exercise the option in 5 years, sometimes it worked out really well. But no one ever really does that.
Okay, so that is actually a very good point, which kind of leads me into the first point that I want to make about lease options from the seller-landlord perspective. And this is very important. You want to try to craft these things as if they're what I call the golden handcuffs. Okay? Now, I'm not here to speak to other people's intentions, but what I will say is about my intentions, and I've done several of these for my own properties, I've brokered them for other people, is that you should do this with the intention of selling the property. Okay? Now, if people don't buy the property, you get a windfall. Okay? But to me, like the last one I did on our house in Lakewood, and I was very clear with my partner about this, and I told the tenant purported buyer this, I said, I'm not doing this to be in the loan-to-own program. I'm doing this to sell the property. We are sellers. We don't want to be landlords, but we will be for an interim period. Okay? And I think that's a very important distinction for people to make. All right? Your mileage may vary. You guys do what you want, but that's what I think. Okay? All right, so that kind of leads us into our first set of talking points, which is, why would you do this? Okay, and there's a variety of use case examples. So let me start with this. We are no longer in the COVID time. Okay, we no longer, as a general market rule, you put a sign out front, 50 people show up, say, I'll give you $500,000 more than asking price, all that kind of stuff. Okay, those days have come and gone. So now we're back to what we would call, in air quotes, a more normalized market, which is generally a market that is looking for the intersection of time and money, is the way that I put it. Okay, and so the old talking point, oh, well, the longer you list it, the more money you'll get. I think that's completely bull.
Who says that?
Everybody. Where have you been?
The longer you list it, the more.
If you wait long enough, you'll get your price. You've never.
Oh, sure.
Well, that's what I mean by that.
It'll be a long time, but.
It could be. Yeah. I think that's ridiculous personally, but a lot of people buy into it. I'm not saying I'm right. I just don't believe it. Anyway. So the first piece of utility of a lease option is that it buys time to complete a transaction. Okay. And if you do it the right way, the purchasing of that time costs the seller very little. Okay, i.e., the tenant's paying your mortgage as you're going along during the option period. Okay, so it can buy time. Another reason to use lease options is that sometimes a buyer just needs a little bit of time to get their financial house in order so they can qualify for a loan. Okay, that happens all the time. What we used the lease option for in our last little development deal was a combination of both time and using the tenant's option money to pay for our development costs. So it's sort of a hybrid, a blending of the two. All right. So again, lease option's not for everybody. You shouldn't think that it is, but in the right situation with the right buyer and seller, it can be the bridge that other people can't build, and you win the day. Okay, so I want to do this kind of in steps. I'll pause there. Does anyone want to say anything about what I just brought up about when to use these things, or have a different use case you want to bring up?
Well, the two that I did are way back in 2006. They were for the same client, and he had bought property when we were still pretty much down economically here in
Yeah,
the
that was
valley.
kind of the beginning of the recession.
Yeah. And then 2006 when or 5 6 when things started to move pretty well, he did not he was looking, I guess, more for cash flow, and he just said, I want to make the interest. I don't want the bank or the credit union to get all the interest money. I want it. So we sat down and did some research, used a guy named Jerry Buss, I think his name was, out of Los Angeles. He used to write a column, was in a lot of newspapers, kind of used his guidelines, and it worked out pretty well for Jim. I think one went 4 years, the other went right up to 5 before they exercised their option. But he was pretty happy with the money that he made in those 4 or 5 years.
Good. So the only thing that I would add to that is this. If the seller's motivation is to collect interest, then they should be selling it on a contract, which would be the second leg of a lease option, or the third leg, if that's how they choose to sell. But just for everybody's benefit, if you're collecting interest, you're in a sale, not in a lease.
Yeah.
Okay, and what I'm going to talk about is a sale that's a cash out, not a carry the paper. You could, if it works out, but that's not what I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Matthew, you had your hand up?
Yes, please. My own impression is that lease option only benefits the sellers. I don't know if there's any instance where the buyer actually benefit from the transaction, though you said the buyer
Sure.
trying to get their financing
Sure.
in order.
And sometimes it allows the buyer to actually get into a property they couldn't otherwise get into. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm going to mostly advocate the seller's position because that's who I'd rather advocate. But it really just depends on how you structure the option fee, the price, and the rent payments as far as who benefits financially. Okay, but there are definite benefits to buyers, and I think the biggest one is, like I just said, they can actually get into a property. Look, these kids we sold this house to in Lakewood that ended up bugging out, they couldn't have bought a house if it wasn't for me and us and putting this into this thing and giving them enough time to clean up their credit so they could close. That was the benefit to them. And they were just fools not to do it, but they didn't, so we took their money. We didn't take it, it was a deal. But we did take it, but we didn't steal it. We just gently removed it from their bank account. Surgically. Okay. Any other general comments, Q&As?
What did your kids think about that?
About what?
I mean, when it all, just, I mean, that was part of the deal. I get that. Were they upset that they're like, ah, crap, we can't buy this thing and we're going to lose our X dollars that we put down on this thing?
Yeah, that's a good
Or were they
point.
just like,
That's a good point. So I'll just give you a little bit of backstory about these people, okay? These people, she was like 20, they're both like 25, 26. And when I met them, they'd been dating for 6 months. She was 3 months pregnant. He worked at a pot store. And she worked as a clerk for a lumber company. Nice kids. I mean, they were fine, you know, and I don't think they were working at a pot store. But what I'm saying is, you know, these are not Ivy League people. And I don't know if they had to borrow the option money. I think they borrow some of it. But I want to be very clear about this. They chose not to buy it.
right.
It was their choice. I mean, you know, welcome to Adultville, everybody. And I just thought, you know, where else are you going to get in a house for this much money? I've given you a lender who has just coddled you and helped you in every way possible to clean up your history of bad choices so that you can actually get the money. And they were VA people. They used their VA certificate. I mean, it couldn't have been a sweeter deal. But he got used to using the big backyard to store all of his cars and all the other shit that he was doing. And when we put the delineation fence in there, they went, oh no, we're going to lose our backyard, which they knew in the beginning. It was in the agreement. It was a survey. I drew a picture. I said, this is the line. When it's done, you get this, not that. And they knew. Oh, well. I mean, do I have even a droplet of remorse about that? Not even a droplet. I did everything for them.
No, I wouldn't say that. I'm just sort of curious.
So they were a little bummed.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
we can't buy it. We're toast.
Well, then they had to find a place to live, and that wasn't an easy task. But they did, you know, and they got out, and it was fine. It worked out.
Michael, you keep saying they can't buy. They could have bought.
They could.
They were
I
approved.
don't know
Yeah.
that. Did they?
I know that.
Yeah.
I do know that.
Yeah.
They were qualified.
Yeah.
Their loan was locked. They chose to walk.
I came in late, but it just sounds like buyer's remorse to me, and they want to feel better about it, so they made some excuse about a lack of understanding of the yard. Like,
He made one comment about that, and I said, don't go there, dude. You're not going to win.
I wouldn't feel bad about it. I'm just sort of curious on the other side.
Yeah. Well, what he did was he looked up what we paid for it, what we were selling it him for, and what the lot was worth, and he thought he was getting ripped off. And I go, no, we're developers. It's what we do. You had full disclosure. But I mean, I understand why they were bummed out. Anyway, they're gone.
Oh, well.
It's
Okay.
you know, life
All right.
moves on, and again, welcome to Adultville.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's talk next about how one goes about putting these things together. Okay. So there's 3 documents that you need. I want you to write this down. Okay. Number 1, you need what I'm going to call a master lease agreement. And I'll talk about why it's the master in just a second. You need one of those. Number 2, you need an option agreement. And number trace, you need a purchase and sale agreement. So these 3 documents are integrated, meaning they relate to, reference each other, are triggered by each other. They're integrated, but they're separate standalone documents. Okay, let me start with the master lease agreement first. The master lease agreement is just a residential lease agreement, but it references a couple of important things that link both to the option agreement and the purchase and sale agreement. The one thing that links to it is the length of lease. Okay, so if you're going to put one of these things together, you need to have a time frame that you want this to be done. Okay, now if you've done leases before, I'm pretty sure everybody has, you have a lease agreement with dates certain for commencement and ending, but then there's a holdover if you go to a month to month. Okay, and that's a separate provision, and we leave that in there, and that's fine and so forth. But in the lease agreement, you want to have your dates nailed. And the second thing you want to do is to delineate 2 forms of rent that are paid. Okay, and this is what I call them. I call them base rent and premium rent. Okay, now combined, it's one number. All right. Now I'm going to go through a little example here. So let me press pause, and I'll go through this, and you can write this down in more detail. But if you want to make a couple of notes right now about our example that I'll start here shortly, and I just made this up, but I figured a house, you'd buy it for $600,000. Okay. You were going to value add to that house in some shape or form another $200,000 over a 2-year period. So the sale price of this house would be $800,000 when you sell it to the lessee, optionee. Okay. In the interim, the lessee will pay a base rent of $3,500 per month and a rent premium of $1,000 per month. Okay, so they're writing a check every month for $4,500. The rent premium of $1,000 gets credited back at the closing when, if, and as they purchase. Okay, and now I'm just going to kind of sidebar to what Mercedes said earlier. If they don't buy the property, they lose the extra $1,000 a month they're paying that would have otherwise been their little set-aside sinking fund savings account. That's part of the golden handcuffs. I'll talk about that more in the option agreement. Okay, but for right now, in the lease agreement, what I like to do is to reference both, delineate them, and say this is the check that you pay. Okay. Now, in the option agreement, they're also going to pay you another lump sum at document execution called an option fee. It is at, in my opinion, the landlord's discretion as to whether or not the landlord wants to also charge a security deposit and or a pet fee. Okay, so how you juggle those balls of tenant, optionee buyer, and deposits and stuff, I mean, that's just a personal decision. When I'm doing it, I go in asking for everything, and then I back off if I need to. And I usually need to, because, that's just me. But I always go in asking for as much as I can get. And if you have buyers who are cash poor, then it's going to be harder for them to come up with more deposit money on the front end. But if they move out and they trash your house, you had no deposit, you're just eating out of your option fee. Okay, so there is that too. All right, other than that, just a typical lease agreement with the typical goodies in it. And I am a pretty strong recommender today. I'm trying to get out of the business of renting property to people, just because we've talked about this. But credit check, a couple references, the usual things that you can do, those always help. Okay. And I would just urge those of us that currently dwell in Western Washington or the People's Republic of Santa Clara County, Jeff, that laws inure to the benefit of tenants and not landlords. So if you have a problem, it's a bigger problem for the landlord under the lease agreement than it is for the tenant, generally speaking. Just remember that. Okay? All right, so that's the lease agreement. Okay, just a standard residential lease agreement. Put those provisions in it, whatever other goodies you think are necessary. Okay, option agreement. And I can squeeze all this into basically one page. So the option agreement references the lease agreement. It also references the purchase and sale agreement. That's the integration part of what I mentioned earlier. And in the body of the option agreement, you specify two things. One is you again recognize the premium rent, the rent premium in my example of $1,000 a month, and you recognize the option fee, which in our example will be $15,000. So the way that I like to do these, and you don't have to do what I'm going to say next, but this is the way that I like to do it. I like to credit back to the buyer at the closing both the option fee and the rent premium for every month they've paid as a tenant. Okay, that's the golden handcuff part. So in my example, which will be a 2-year example, a 2-year hold, they're paying an extra $1,000 a month for 24 months. That's $24,000 and $15,000 in option fee. You're giving them $39,000 back at the end in a credit to the price. Now, if you want to credit the price or have them be able to pull out of cash, that's all an escrow instruction. But they get that back if they stick around, if they faithfully execute the terms of the lease, and if they successfully close escrow for the sale. Okay, let me pause there. Want to say anything else about option agreements? Any questions about that? Okay. All right. Third document, purchase and sale agreement. Okay, just a standard purchase and sale agreement. But here's a couple of wrinkles that you just want to be mindful of. Okay, so first of all, this purchase and sale agreement, when it's executed at the beginning, needs to have a price certain built into it. So you are basically saying today, I'm contracting to sell this property for X in the future. Now that can bring with it some risk, as we all know, the biggest risk being what if it does not appraise? So you have to build in whatever mitigations you want to. That stuff's all, in the body of those documents anyway. But just kind of remember that. You're not contracting for a price today, you're contracting for a price in the future.
Okay, so you're saying like do a 2-year lease and add in what, a 4% gain
Whatever.
for the next 2 years, and that's the price.
Yeah, however you want to determine the future price, but you need to have that in. And this is an element of the statute of frauds, is certainty. It can't just be open-ended, okay? Parties will decide 2 years from now what the deal's going to be. Doesn't work that way, okay? And it's just not good business, But again, there's an element of risk with that, okay? In that purchase and sale agreement, well, let me back up a step. I know this isn't really a big deal with residential properties generally, but for me, coming from the more commercial background, I learned, a long time ago, pull a prelim title day one. So you don't want to have title examination issues become a problem when the buyer moves in the future into those due diligence periods, okay? But I think you need to reasonably give them time for title review, okay? Somewhere in that purchase and sale agreement, I strongly recommend that you also negotiate inspections, okay? Now, the best way to do it, the cleanest way to do it, is you had an inspection done when you bought the property. And what that does is that establishes a baseline. Okay. It also establishes a baseline. If something happens to the house, you can say, hey, we inspected this thing and the plumbing worked when, or whatever. Okay. But you just have to kind of think about this. Just a sec, Michael. You have to kind of think about this globally. Again, your mindset needs to be in the future. And from the seller's perspective, you want to reduce as many feasibility items that allow the buyer to escape, in air quotes, as possible. You want to do that on the front end as much as you possibly can, and things happen. So do your best. Michael, what do you got?
When you said inspection, are you saying the buyer does inspection as in a like in a regular residential sale, or
I would,
seller
yeah,
as a
I would give the buyer the ability to do an inspection, but I would want to close the loop that if they didn't like the inspection, that they could walk away from the deal. or that they're going to, for whatever reason, for 2 years from now, come back with an onerous shopping list of stuff that I have to do as a condition of the sale. And here's why, okay? Because when you get to that point, you guys have already been in bed together for 2 years. And there's money on the table. And when stuff starts falling apart, people get pissed. You know what I'm saying? So you got to think about this stuff today and try to minimize feasibility in the future.
Joe?
Yeah.
In the boilerplate of the purchase and sale, there's something about the seller maintaining the property in its current condition until closing. So if something were to happen and you have your inspection or whatever documentation you have, wouldn't you have to repair it anyway?
Well,
Like the pipe starts leaking.
So here's my argument. My argument is they are occupying the property under a leasehold tenancy. So if something was broken, they broke it as a tenant. And I would refer to the lease as to repairing that problem. Okay, because they've been a tenant the whole time. So that you have to make sure that the integration, what supersedes what, make sure things aren't contradictory and so forth. And look, over the course of my career, maybe you've done this too. I mean, I'm a fairly proficient technical reader. I have read more documents prepared by lawyers that have internal contradictions than I would ever care to repeat. It happens. Okay. And let me just mention this real quick. I'm a strong advocate of, once you prepare all these documents, I would have a lawyer look it over before I present it. Just have another set of eyes, make sure that I didn't screw things up. And I know that people don't like to do that, but I have to say I recommend it.
What, can you just clarify that whole leasehold tenant and their responsibility to repair items?
Sure. So Mercedes' question was, what happens when you get in the future and you're under the binding purchase and sale agreement part, which should be triggered once I didn't mention this yet, once the tenant buyer formally exercises their option, which should be done in writing. Okay. Once they exercise that option, then you go into purchase and sale agreement, right? And so what Mercedes is saying is, well, in the standard Press Art 5 copy lawyer approved purchase and sale agreement, the seller has a duty to maintain the physical element of the property during the time between contract and close, right? You know what I'm saying on that, Kelly? That's the seller's responsibility. What I'm saying is, and it's an argument, which I would make strongly with any opposing counsel, that I would refer back to the lease agreement, because the tenant had a leasehold tenancy and they have to follow their duties under that lease agreement. So if something's broken, let's furnace, mechanical, whatever, okay? But it's expensive, and it wasn't that way when I handed the keys to the tenant, who was a tenant when I handed him the keys. Then you get into the normal wear and tear stuff. And this is why it is good policy for the seller to have an inspection done prior to entering the agreement. Okay, look, you can't prevent everything. Okay, so you do your best. And in the marketplace today, we have tools available to us, resources, customs, mores, procedures, and using an inspection is one of those.
Seems like a good time to have a house warranty. Have the seller just pay for a home warranty for 2 years.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So you said exercise their right to whatever, what was that? Buyer needs to exercise.
Help me here. I'm having a senior moment. It was such a good sermon, too.
What's that?
It was such a good sermon. I forgot what I said.
I know. No, you said the buyer has to formally in writing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Exercise their option.
Their option.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's baked into the body of the option agreement. And generally, it's within a certain period of time prior to the expiration of the lease agreement.
Okay.
They have to notify the seller landlord, yes, I am going to exercise my option. I am going to close. And I think usually I've used like 30 days prior to the expiration of the lease. Again, these documents are integrated. They refer to each other. Christine.
So just real quick, I want to clarify this then. So minor things, wear and tear, stuff like that, I get, but so the furnace is 10 years old and it goes out, and because of the new regulations, you can't get the certain Freon or whatever. And so who pays for that new system? Does the lease?
Well, if it's normal wear and tear, and it happened during the lease tenancy, without any more information, I'd say probably the seller.
The warranty. Get the warranty.
Yeah. Well, and that was my impression as well, but I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I want to answer questions. I'm here to be an instructor. But I also have to remember that, some questions I get are like, how many angels dance on the head of a pin? You just can't tell. It just depends on the pin. But I think that Kelly makes a good point. Get the damn warranty. It's good.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
Can I ask a question? So if you have a occupant and they're under this sort of agreement, are you considering them a tenant or are you considering them early owner? Like,
I'm considering them a tenant until they exercise their option.
okay. So I'm like, okay. I'm answering my own questions as I almost speak them.
Kind of funny how that works sometimes,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Just thinking out loud.
Yeah, no, that's good. And you guys haven't done this a bunch, and that's why you're here. Thanks for showing up. That's why we do this. We have questions, but I think, especially with this kind of an agreement, because it is a longer term. Look, when I got in the business, I started out doing commercial leasing. Okay, so if I had to pick one number, the most common tenancy length of a commercial lease is 5 years. So what I learned once I had some mileage and I'd done some of these and I'd been around for a while is, in the beginning, everybody's in love. Oh, you're just the best tenant ever, and here's all the stuff. Oh, you're the best landlord ever. I'll be the best tenant ever. All that kind of thing. It's kind of like being married, and then, a couple years from now, 3 years from now, like, oh, really? This is who you really are, and oh, this is a problem. And when those things happen, the lease is the first place everybody runs. It's the first place. I've seen it too many times. And that's why in that part of the real estate industry, you've got to be super meticulous about drafting. And this is where I was kind of trained, so my mind kind of works this way, and I've just come to realize you try to address as many common things that you think might potentially happen in the future, but you're not going to get everything. It's just not going to happen.
How does this differ or better or worse than just straight seller financing?
Well, how is it different? Well, it's different because you have a lease built into it. Okay, so let me just demark that right there. Go back to what Jacques said. If you want to just sell the property and you can, wrap an underlying contract or you own it free and clear or whatever, then you might not need all this. Okay, the example I'm going to go through here in just a minute is you're going to do a value add during the lease hold. Okay, which is a similar model that we did on our house in Lakewood. And I've done it before too, with other deals that I've done when I was doing more of the construction side of things. But that's the big difference. Look, if someone says, look, I'm done, I just want to collect a check every month, I don't want to do all this option fee and this and that and what if and tra-la-la, fine, just sell it on a contract. That's cool.
So the benefit to the buyer to do this lease option to buy is what?
They don't have to typically have as much of a down payment. If you're going to do a owner carry contract, I'm going to want $20,000, $30,000.
Let's make sure we're talking about the same thing here. A lease option is not an owner contract. They're two different things.
Sure, sure.
Okay, so the
So
biggest
if an owner-
benefit to a buyer of a lease option is it buys them time and they control the property. Here's the thing to remember about option agreements. Options inure to the benefit of the tenant or the buyer, not the seller or the landlord. Anytime you have an option, you're controlling somebody else's asset. They're effectively taking that property off the market unless they decide that they want it. And you can't sell to anybody else until they say no.
Right.
Okie dokie.